Hello, my name is Dr. Peter Sjöstedt-Hughes, and I am a philosopher at the University of Exeter. My talk today will be on Alfred North Whitehead and the problem of mental causation. So, as an introduction, I shall say that there are certain fundamental questions which are both highly theoretical, yet also of great personal importance to one's understanding of oneself. I refer to the questions concerning the meaning of mind, of matter, why we distinguish the two, and how they relate to each other. One of the founders of modern mathematics and philosophy, René Descartes, argued that mind and matter were separate substances that interacted in the pineal gland within the brain. Thus, for Descartes, when the brain and body died, the mind, as soul, would endure in an afterlife. This idea of the mind-matter relation, called substance dualism, is generally rejected in modern academia today, but the interaction problems that plagued such dualism remain, albeit in different form, within modern philosophy of mind and science. A key problem that persists since Descartes is that of mental causation. From a dualistic perspective, the problem is how something, the mind, that is immaterial, can interact with something, body, that is material. From the modern perspective of physicalism or material monism, the perspective that everything is ultimately reducible to matter and energy in space-time, behaving according to laws of nature, the problem becomes that of explaining how mind states, such as conscious reasoning, desires, perceptions that induce fear, etc., can have any effect on the underlying neurological base that itself gives rise to these mind states. How can the mind have an effect upon the brain, body, and world if everything acts according to physical forces and determined laws? Though there are various attempted solutions to this problem of mental causation, including the denial of mental causation, there is no agreement upon any such proposed solution, with some thinkers even suggesting that a solution is not possible for humans to possess. The problem is very deep and very personal, and this thus suggests that a possible solution must come from questioning the metaphysical framework in which the problem is posed. I shall suggest how the metaphysical framework of process philosophy, as inaugurated by Alfred North Whitehead, who lived from 1861 to 1947, might lead to a resolution of the problem of mental causation through his reformulation of causation, nomology, laws of nature and mind, and ontology, from dualism and physicalism to a general monism. Such a theoretical reformulation with its proposed solution may also act as a more mentally healthy way in which persons may approach reality. So, first section, what is mental causation? First, let us define a mental state as any experience, from acute conscious awareness through to concepts, reasoning, perceptions, imaginings, emotions, will, subconscious feelings, proprioception, bodily feeling, temporal sense, dreams, aesthetic appreciation, etc. In the modern literature, there are two main types of mental causation. There is mental to mental causation, and there is mental to physical causation. It is the latter which is mostly discussed. Mental causation is not the same as free will, because mental causation could be fully determined by prior causes, and because mental causation does not of necessity concern the will. Mental to mental causation is the notion that one mental state causes another mental state, such as the thought of the sun causing the thought of the cosmos, or a thirst causing the imagining of a cold drink. Mental to physical causation, the most discussed type of mental causation, is the notion that a mental state itself causes bodily movement. Examples include consciously calculating a mathematical question, which causes one to write down an answer, a desire for food, causing one to enter the kitchen, a feeling of compassion, causing a person to send money to a charity, the perception of a threat to a fight or flight response, etc. Section 2. Why should mental causation be accepted? Though mental causation is commonly believed in, there are many figures who reject its existence, for reasons that will become clear in a moment. The complete denial of the existence of mental causation is called epiphenomenalism, which is a belief most commonly attributed to Thomas Huxley in the 19th century. Huxley considered mental states to be akin to the steam that emanates from a locomotive train engine, a mere byproduct of the machinations of the efficacious machine, and plays no causal role in the movement of the train. Another analogy is that of considering mental states as the shadows of moving cars. Though caused by the cars, they have no causal effect upon the car's movements. There are, however, powerful reasons to reject epiphenomenalism and so accept the existence of mental causation. The first one is the evolutionary argument for mental causation. A number of prominent thinkers, from Herbert Spencer to F. H. Bradley, William James, and Karl Popper, have argued that if mental states or mentality had no causal power, then mentality, consciousness, sentience, would not have evolved and maintained itself in humans or any other species. What would be the evolutionary function of mentality if mentality had no effect upon anything? Why would we humans have evolved our conscious intelligence and reasoning capacities if this had absolutely no bearing upon our behaviour? Why would we feel pain if the mental state pain had no causal power on our movements? Why would we need conscious perceptions of the environment if such perceptions served no purpose? Some have argued that mentality is akin to vestigial organs, but vestigial organs once did have a function. Others have argued that mentality is a spandrel, a byproduct of evolution which has no adaptive power, such as the chin or the coloured pattern of a sparrow's underwing. However, it is highly improbable that experience, consciousness, mentality is a spandrel if it has not only evolved in its current forms in humans, but also presumably in a vast variety of other organisms. Spandrels are unique, not common, and moreover the very concept of spandrel is questionable. Thus the causal power of mentality, that is mental causation, seems to be a necessary element of evolution. As such, its denial, epiphenomenalism, appears as an anti-evolutionary position. For something to exist seems to imply that it must have causal power. In the words of Plato, quote, "The definition of being is simply power," end quote. The second reason for accepting mental causation is that mental causation is the condition for psychology. The great late philosopher of mind, Jaegwon Kim, argued that, quote, "The possibility of psychology as a science capable of generating law-based explanations of human behaviour depends on the reality of mental causation. Mental phenomena must be capable of functioning as indispensable links in causal chains leading to physical behaviour." End quote. In other words, without the existence of mental causation, psychology would be a pointless endeavour that would be completely reducible and assimilated into pure anatomical neuroscience. Moreover, psychotherapy would have no causal power and would also, as such, be useless. The psychological analysis of certain beliefs stemming from episodic memories in the subconscious, forms of mental-to-mental causation, would be a delusive practice. Epiphenomenalism destroys psychology. By upholding the legitimacy of psychology, we must thereby uphold the reality of mental causation as one of its necessary conditions. Thirdly, mental causation is the condition for knowledge. More generally, mental causation is in fact, it seems, a condition for all sciences, and moreover, all knowledge. That the mental states that are our episodic memories help us understand and maintain concepts and relations amongst concepts appears as a requisite for knowledge. That knowledge is further acquired through conscious reasoning and sciences such as logic, mathematics, physics, etc., again requires the causal efficacy of the mental. That so much of human knowledge has been acquired through the acquisition of empirical, that is, consciously observed data, again shows the necessity of mental causation for knowledge. Furthermore, knowledge itself is mental. The non-mental storage of information is itself not knowledge. A book does not itself know anything. And so the application of knowledge is another instance of mental causation. Fourthly, mental causation is the condition for moral responsibility. If one is to assign moral praise or blame for a person's actions, this implies that the person had certain mental states, such as intentions, compassion, self-discipline, etc., that were causally efficacious to the moral action in question. The basis of assigning guilt in law is that the person in question was not fully determined by external causes, but himself determined his own actions, at least to an extent. Epiphenomenalism appears to extinguish normal moral practice. Now, the third section is what is the problem of mental causation? Firstly, anomalousness. Though there are then good reasons for wanting to maintain mental causation, there are a number of good reasons for rejecting it as well. And this antagonism represents the problem of mental causation. The first problem I shall mention is what may be called anomalousness. Nomology is the study of laws. Anomalousness is the contrary of nomology in that it means the deviation from laws, norms, or from what is expected. The brain, body, and world seem to operate according to the forces and laws of nature that determine the activity of everything. It is generally believed that these laws are ultimately reducible to the laws of physics. Mental causation, however, seems not to accord with such physics nomology. Desires, for instance, are not taken into consideration in physics. In this sense, it can be said that mental causation is anomalous, even though in psychology there may be psychological laws that can determine such causation. This problem cannot be resolved by identifying mental states with the physical neurological states to which they correlate, because this would ultimately lead to epiphenomenalism, that it was not the mental state as such which had causal efficacy, but the neurological state. This would make mentality again useless, thus it would entail once more an anti-evolutionary stance. Thus, we see here with mental causation an interesting rift between evolutionary theory and physics. The nomology of physics creates a problem for the very possibility of mental causation. A second problem of mental causation is determinism. The laws of physics, though probabilistic rather than absolute in many modern guises, are fathomed chiefly in order to determine the future and to create technology, including medicines and weaponry. We can predict the time and place of the eclipses of the sun due to the application of the laws of physics upon the forces of the physical. If the future is determined by such an application, it seems that, in theory if not in practice, even our own bodily movements and mentality should be determinable by the same laws. But if our bodily movements and mentality are fully determined by physical forces acting in accordance with the laws of physics, then there is no space left for the possibility or necessity of mental causation. Thirdly, causal closure and overdetermination. What if, therefore, one argued that both mentality and physicality had causal efficacy? There are two problems with this approach. Firstly, it seems that the physical world has a causal closure. In other words, all physical events appear to have only physical causes. If they did not, the whole scientific edifice would fall apart, allowing for religious miracles and other supernatural phenomena, and for events without causes. Thus, a mental event seemingly should not be able to cause change in a physical event, such as the activity of neurons. Secondly, there is the problem of overdetermination. If a mental state was caused by both a previous mental state as well as a physical and neurological state, then that mental state would have two sufficient causes. It would be overdetermined. Likewise, if a physical state was determined by both a mental state, for example desire, as well as a physical state, for example neurological activity, it too would be overdetermined. Such continual overdetermination appears superfluous for a parsimonious understanding of reality, so should be rejected. So, allowing for both mental and physical determination also leads to a problem of mental causation. Fourthly, efficient causation. Alfred Whitehead claimed that, quote, Aristotle led to a wild overstressing of the notion of final causes during the Christian Middle Ages, and thence by a reaction to the correlative overstressing of the notion of efficient causes during the modern scientific period. End quote. The Western modern scientific period, from Galileo, who died in 1642, onwards, rejected the old notion that final causes, or purposes, lay within nature itself. When Descartes defined the natural world as purely spatial and geometric, then motion could be understood purely through prior non-mental efficient causes, firstly as push and pull, impulse, then as action from a distance, gravity, and so on. There was no need to invoke purposes, final causes, teloi to explain the workings of nature. This emphasis on efficient causality was eventually applied in the West to organisms, including mankind. This meant that the methodology of science sought by its very nature to explain mental purposes, a primal type of mental causation, intention's will, through efficient causes. Efficient causes were understood through physics. Thus, purposive mental causation is in its very nature anathema to the very foundations of modern Western science. As Whitehead quips, quote, scientists, animated by the purpose of proving that they are purposeless, constitute an interesting subject for study, end quote. This again is why mental causation seems a problem, yet the problem signifies that something is wrong with the underlying methodology, with the foundational metaphysics upon which Western science is unwittingly based. So the fourth section then, what is the Whiteheadian process resolution to the problem of mental causation? As well as a metaphysician, Whitehead was a logician, mathematician, educationalist, and physicist of sorts, who taught at Cambridge University, Imperial College London, and Harvard University. He was seminal in founding formal logic, as well as the science of epigenetics, though it is his metaphysics which is the most revolutionary, though it has not yet been fully realized. The problem of mental causation in its modern form is a problem for physicalist metaphysics, physicalism, the belief that everything is ultimately reducible to matter energy as such. The prevalent type of physicalism today is known as emergentism, the notion that the mind emerges from neurological activity. Change the underlying brain activity and the supervening mental activity will also necessarily change. There are other less popular forms of physicalism, such as eliminativism, that mentality does not exist, and psychoneural identity theory, that the mental is the neurological, rather than that it emerges from the neurological. These latter forms have been rejected for logical reasons, and I shall not dwell on them here. Epiphenomenalism is a type of emergentism, though not one that many emergentists today want to endorse, as they want to accept mental causation in a physical world, for reasons given earlier. In place of physicalism, Whitehead, following certain figures such as Spinoza, argues for a general monism. Monism here means that neither matter nor mind is more fundamental than the other. Mind cannot be reduced to matter, matter cannot be reduced to mind, as in idealism. All actual events for Whitehead are both mental and material. Our understanding of matter, Whitehead says, is an abstraction, that is, a partial understanding. When we view matter as mere solid extension, spatiality, we miss many qualities that make up the matter in question. One fundamental quality we do not explicitly perceive in matter is mind, mentality. Even in other humans, we only explicitly see their physical bodies and infer their mentality. But for Whitehead, this mentality goes all the way down from human to subatomic eventical. In other words, our human perceptions and conceptions are limited. In ourselves, of course, we perceive and conceive both our body and the intrinsic quality thereof, our mentality. This double aspect is not limited to humanity, but applies to every entity in the universe. All events are physical mental, but we only obviously perceive this in ourselves. Such a monism faces the overdetermination problem for mental causation. In such monism, we cannot distinguish in concreto the physical from the mental. They are the same thing understood from two perspectives, just as a triangle and square can be two perspectives on the same thing, a pyramid. As the mental and the physical are not distinct, one event cannot be overdetermined, as there can only be one type of cause rather than two. Instead of, say, the overdetermination of a physical event by both a mental event and a physical event, it is rather the case that the physical mental event causes another physical mental event. This is a parsimonious linear form of causation which avoids the overdetermination issue against the possibility of mental causation. It also avoids the problem posed by the causal closure principle. All events are concretely physical mental, and therefore what we understand as physical causation was always, unbeknownst to physicists, at the same time also mental causation. There is an element in all causation which is really simply all activity, that is mental, not consciousness necessarily, but primal feelings akin to our subconsciousness. This is one reason as to why Whitehead's process philosophy is labelled pan-experientialism. Everything has an experiential element. The laws of nature, as we have them today, simply abstracts away this intrinsic quality and is then consequently puzzled by its necessary existence and power. This implies, of course, that most mental causation is not free but determined by regularity. Just as much of our mental lives is determined, we immediately react sadly to some events, happily to others. This is often beyond any self-caused control. Whitehead's view of the laws of nature have a bearing on the anomalousness issue for mental causation. Following to a degree David Hume, Whitehead argues that the so-called laws of nature are not constants but rather regularities. We observe regularities of nature, such as the speed of light, and then perform the fallacy of generalizing from the particular by claiming that these particular regularities are universal, applying through time and space. This, of course, cannot be proved logically or empirically. In place of this somewhat theological underpinning of nomology, Whitehead argues that the laws of nature are merely after-reflections of the habits or current regularities of nature. But nature, or actuality, evolves, and thus so do the laws as reflections thereof. Whitehead calls his metaphysics the philosophy of organism, because for him all actualities are organisms, including molecules, electrons, etc. The dichotomy between the organic and the inorganic is another conceptual error. Thus everything is organic, everything evolves, and so the laws of physics, in reflecting the changing behaviour of actualities, also change themselves. Even the laws of nature are in process of change in process philosophy. Therefore the future cannot be fully determined, even in principle. As a consequence, a possibility of partial self-causation is left to agents. We are not completely determined by external causes, but in some cases there is the possibility of exerting causation from an internal source. This would be the power of creativity weighing against the power of determinism, which is only habituated activity, the force of the new against the old. Whitehead claims that there is an element of creativity inherent in the universe as a whole, which can be executed through novel forms of mentality. Survival is not the highest principle of complex life because simpler forms have better survivability prospects. A rock survives longer than a butterfly. For Whitehead, there is an upward trend to greater forms of complexity and beauty. Aesthetics is not a mere epiphenomenon, but signifies an essential component of the living cosmos. For Whitehead, such creativity can be actualized in the mentality of entities such as ourselves, partly because The possibilities, eternal objects, for mentality are infinite. As Jae Kwon Kim argued, the particular forms of qualia, such as colour, that we humans have is arbitrary, not necessary. The possibilities are infinite, and so the hitherto set laws of nature do not exhaust the possibilities for new mental states, and thus, via monism, new physical states. Whitehead even argues that the 3 dimensions of our space is arbitrary and subject to possible change. With regard to efficient causation, Whitehead writes that the core drive of every entity is a subjective aim analogous to the will to survive or the conatus in earlier thinkers. This aim is the final cause, the purpose of an entity, which is as fundamental to that entity as the efficient causes which also brought it into being. Final causes, intentions, purposes are about something. For example, food or drink. This is known as intentionality. A purely physical state, in reality a false abstraction, cannot be about anything. Thus, final causes are not easily reduced to the purely physical events that constitute efficient causation. Whitehead goes further and states that, quote, apart from final causation, the very existence of reason is purposeless, and its origination is inexplicable, end quote. In other words, the very essence of our reason is to work out the means by which to fulfill our purposes, final causes. Without final causes guiding our behaviours, we would not have developed the reason that makes us human. Now, a final cause purpose is a mental state, whether it is conscious or subconscious. Thus, in accepting the necessity of the causal power of purposes, we must accept the reality of mental causation. Final causation is a type of mental causation. For Whitehead's philosophy, everything is an event, a process, thus its designation as process philosophy. Every event has both a physical and mental pole in line with the monism of process philosophy. Moreover, all activity is causation. Every event has an effect and is an effect. Therefore, every event also has a cause and is a cause. For this metaphysics, there is no static soul substance that represents the external world as static mental states. Instead, an event fuses itself into another perceiving event. This process is referred to as apprehension. The perception of an event is itself part of that event. This in turn means that perception is causation. Thus, as perception is an aspect of the mental, and as perception is causation, perception itself is mental causation. All of these proposed solutions to the problem of mental causation need to be fully explored. I only give you here ideas for such exploration. In providing this Whiteheadian framework in which to potentially resolve mental causation problems, I believe one is also provided with a metaphysics, a philosophy of organism, that allows for a revaluation of our relation to nature itself. Many theorists have suggested that the malaise and depression that afflicts many in the world is due to the desolate, lifeless metaphysics of physicalism. It is a world where nature is mostly dead, and one in which we are detached, powerless agents in its cold grip of a deterministic fatalism that sees creativity and beauty as illusions. Whitehead's process philosophy, in contradistinction, sees nature as alive and creative, aesthetic impulses as fundamental. It is a philosophy that is both compatible with science, yet superior to the old metaphysics that still dominates science. It is a new world, and one that can inspire people out of their apathetic melancholy. Metaphysics is crucial to grasp mental causation and to galvanize mental health. Thank you for your time.